Has anybody pulled that shoe? Merritt Kettleman did not turn around. He had 140 people arranged on a lawn in front of him and a wireless microphone clipped to the lapel of a linen jacket the color of oatmeal. And he was 6 sentences into a talk about hoof balance that he had given, in one version or another, at 4 conferences and a trade show in Louisville. He was a man who had learned that if you keep talking, most questions go away. The question did not go away. Has anybody pulled that shoe? The voice said again, not louder, just again. Kettleman turned. What he saw was a black man somewhere past 60 standing on the wrong side of the whiteboard fence in a farrier's apron of split cowhide worn silver at the knees, rubber muck boots with the left toe cracked open in a grin, and a feed store cap so faded you could not read what it was advertising anymore. He saw a hoof knife riding in the apron pocket. He saw hands with black in every crease, the kind of black that stops being dirt after about the 15th year and becomes part of the hand. He saw a man who had clearly come from somewhere with a barn in it, and in the half-second it took him to sort all of that. He decided what he was looking at. Muck crew, somebody's uncle, a man who had wandered up from the equipment lot to see what the tents were about. "Sir," Kettleman said into the microphone, so that 140 people heard it, "this is a private event. If you need something, the trailers are back down the hill." "I don't need anything," the man said. "I asked if anybody pulled that shoe." His name was Ezekiel Marrow. Most people who had ever paid him called him Zeke. He had been shoeing horses in Fayette County, Kentucky for 38 years, which meant that on the day he stood at that fence, he had picked up somewhere north of 400,000 feet, one at a time, and set each one down again. He was not looking at Kettleman. He had not looked at Kettleman once. He was looking at a bay colt standing 30 feet away on a strip of paved apron between the show barn and the grass, held by a groom in a monogrammed polo, with 2 men in seersucker crouched beside him and a third taking pictures with a phone. The colt was named Hard Bargain. He had been bought as a yearling for $4 million, insured for $4,250,000. And 11 days earlier he had come back from a workout at Ashwater Downs wrong in a way nobody could name. 11 days, 264 hours, 4 veterinarians, 2 sets of radiographs, 1 ultrasound of a shoulder, 1 nerve block that told them nothing, and a joint injection. And in all of that, nobody had spent the $9 worth of labor it takes to take a shoe off a foot. Zeke knew that the way you know it is raining. The colt was standing with his right front foot set out ahead of him, toe barely touching, heel just off the ground. The way a horse stands when he has decided that particular foot is not going to be part of the arrangement. Every few seconds he shifted, put a little weight on it, took it back off. His weight was rocked back onto his hocks. His nostrils were doing a thing that a man who has spent his life at knee level learns to read before he learns to explain. 15 seconds. That was all it took, and 14 of those seconds were courtesy. I want you to picture this, because the picture is the whole story. 300 people on a spring lawn in the bluegrass, dogwoods out, a tent with a bar under it and a man in a white coat pouring bourbon over 1 large clear cube. Women in hats. Men in seersucker with owners' badges clipped to their pockets. A photographer the farm had hired for the day. And a videographer the farm had also hired, because the whole point of the afternoon was to talk 60 wealthy people into buying shares in a Colt. And at the fence, in a leather apron, 1 man who could see what was wrong and could not get anyone to look at him. Kettleman came down off the flagstone step, and he came at an angle, the way you approach something you intend to move. "You're going to have to step back from the fence," he said. "Pick up his right front," Zeke said. "That's all. Pick it up and put a set of hoof testers on the inside quarter. It'll take you 40 seconds. I'm the farrier of record on this farm." "I know who you are," Zeke said. "There is a specific kind of quiet that comes over a crowd of comfortable people when somebody they have already filed away refuses to stay filed. It is not a polite quiet. It leans in. 300 people stopped talking almost at once. And the sound that was left was the ice in the drinks and a mockingbird somewhere behind the show barn running through his whole catalog. Prescott Hurst came across the grass fast. Hurst was the general manager of Merrick Ridge Farm, a big soft man in a blue blazer with a radio on his belt. And he had 2 jobs that afternoon, and one of them was making sure nothing happened. "Sir," Hurst said quietly, "close in. I'm going to need you to leave the property. This is the part I would ask you to sit with. Not the insult. The insult is easy. The insult is a man in a linen jacket telling a man in a leather apron that the trailers are back down the hill. Sit with the fact that Prescott Hurst had, 21 months earlier, ended Ezekiel Marrow's 19-year working relationship with Merrick Ridge Farm in a phone call that lasted 91 seconds, and that he was now standing 18 inches away from him, looking directly into his face, telling him to get off the property. And he did not know who he was talking to. That is not a plot twist. That is just what happens to a man who has spent his life being the person other people talk over. You become furniture, you become a category. And a category does not have a face. Zeke did not raise his voice and he did not move. That Colt has an abscess coming up under a nail, he said. Probably the third or fourth on the inside. He's been standing on it for at least a week, and he's been telling everybody in this barn about it the whole time. He's been scoped, x-rayed, and blocked by 4 veterinarians, Kettleman said. Then you all looked everywhere but down, and that was when Harlan Ridgway got involved. Ridgway owned the Colt. He had made his money in corrugated packaging, which is to say cardboard boxes, which is not a thing you put on a hat. And he had made a great deal of it, and 11 years ago he had discovered that a man with money in Kentucky is expected to have opinions about horses. He was 58, he was wearing a poplin suit, and no tie and shoes that had never been on grass before that day. He had flown in that morning from Cincinnati because his $4 million Colt was standing in a shed row doing nothing, and because his people had told him a bone scan in Ocala was the next step, and because he had begun, in the way of men who are used to problems having invoices attached to them, to be bored and angry in equal measure. He walked out past the tent with a glass in his hand. "Hold on," he said. "Hold on. Let him talk." "Mr. Ridgway," Kettleman said. "No," Ridgway said. 4 vets. 11 days. A shoulder injection. And this gentleman just walked up off the road and diagnosed my horse from 40 feet away through a fence. He turned around to the crowd, and he did it slowly, so they would all be with him. "I'd like to make a bet," he said. "I have thought about that sentence a great deal since. I have thought about the fact that a man could look at another man's face and see correctly that he was serious, and that his response to that seriousness was to turn it into entertainment for 60 investors. $250,000, Ridgway said. "That you can't tell me what's wrong with that horse." Somebody laughed. "Somebody always does." "The van's coming at 4, Ridgway said. "Ramp goes up at 4, he goes to Ocala. And I write a check to a clinic in Florida for a scan that costs more than my first house. You've got until that ramp closes. 250,000 says you're wrong." He was enjoying himself. I want to be plain about that, because later on people are going to want to make Harlan Ridgway a hero. And I am not going to let them do it for free. In that moment, he was not looking for the truth. He was killing 40 minutes. Zeke looked at the clock on the show barn. Then he looked at Ridgway for the first time. "I don't want your money," he said. "Everybody wants my money." "I want your permission," Zeke said. "That's your horse. Nobody can put a hand on him without you saying so, and this man is not going to say so. And I'm not going to touch a $4 million animal without the owner's word in front of witnesses. So keep your bet. Give me your permission." Ridgway stopped smiling for the first time. Then he said it anyway, because men like that cannot leave a thing alone. "You've got both," he said. "Mr. Ridgway," Kettleman said, "if that man puts a hand on my horse, I'm off this farm today." Ridgway did not even look at him. "Then go pack," he said. 41 minutes. To understand why 15 seconds was enough, you have to go back about 54 years, and you have to start with a truck. It was a Ford green once, then the color of a green thing left outside, with a wooden box built into the bed by a man who was better at horses than he was at carpentry. In that box were rasps and clinchers and a nipper with a taped handle, a coal forge on a folding stand, a hand crank blower, a 100-pound anvil chained down so it would not walk, and a galvanized bucket for quenching that had been a milk bucket in a previous life. The truck belonged to Willis Marrow, and Willis Marrow shod horses in Fayette County, Kentucky, for 46 years, and he never in his life owned 1 square foot of the ground he worked on. He entered through the back gates, all of them. He knew every service road and every hay lane on the Georgetown Road and the old Frankfort Pike, and he knew which farms would let him use the wash rack and which ones wanted him gone before the buyers came. and he knew the exact tone of voice to use with a man who was about to explain his own horse to him. He had one boy. The boy's name was Ezekiel, out of the book of Ezekiel, and Verbena Marrow had picked it because it was the only book she had ever read straight through twice. Zeke went out on the truck the summer he turned 7. His first job was the bucket. His second job was holding the leg. Not the foot, the leg, at the pastern, standing in tight against the horse's shoulder the way his father showed him. Because a man who stands away from a horse gets kicked, and a man who stands in close does not. He got kicked anyway. A 3-year-old filly with an opinion caught him just under the ribs on a July afternoon and put him in the grass. And he lay there looking at the sky and trying to remember how breathing worked, and his father finished the foot before he came over. "You alive," Willis said. Zeke got up. He got up because the alternative was to be a boy who did not get up, and he had already worked out that his father would let him be that if he wanted, and that he would not stop being that afterward. He held the next foot. That is the whole education, if you want it in one sentence, but it took 30 years, so let me slow down. Willis taught him that a foot talks. He taught him that heat in a hoof is not nothing. It is the first sentence of a paragraph. He taught him that a bounding digital pulse at the back of the fetlock, the little artery you can find with 2 fingers if you know where to be still, means blood is trying to get somewhere, and the foot will not let it. He taught him that a horse who is worse on hard ground and better on grass has a foot problem, and a horse who is the same on both has something higher up, and that this one distinction, free, costing nothing, requiring only that you walk the animal 20 steps on 2 surfaces, would save more horses than every machine in the state. He taught him to read a sole. 8 millimeters of sole is a floor. 6 is a rumor. He taught him to hold a nail between his fingers and feel, through the hammer, the difference between a nail running out through the wall the way it should and a nail leaning in toward the soft part of the foot, and that the difference is smaller than the width of a pencil line, and that a man who cannot feel it should be doing something else with his afternoons. And he taught him the history, in pieces over years, usually while he was under a horse and could not be interrupted. The first Kentucky Derby was run in 1875. 13 of the 15 jockeys in that race were black men. The winner was a black man named Oliver Lewis. The horse's trainer was a formerly enslaved man named Ansel Williamson. A black jockey born in Kentucky named Isaac Burns Murphy won the Derby 3 times and is buried in Lexington. And, for a stretch of years around the turn of the century, black horsemen were the sport, top to bottom, riders and trainers and grooms and blacksmiths. And then they were gone. Not slowly. Within about 25 years, there was almost nobody left, pushed out by riders who would not ride against them, by tracks that stopped issuing licenses, by owners who found it convenient to stop calling. Willis Marrow used to say it in a way Zeke did not understand until he was 40. They never had to take the horses, he said. They just took the paper, meaning the license, meaning the contract, meaning the record that says you were there, and you did the work, and you did it right. Take a man's paper, and in 20 years there is no evidence he ever existed, and the people who come after will tell each other honestly, with no malice at all, that folks like that were never in this business. I want to stop here, because this is the hinge the whole story turns on, and if you miss it, the rest is just a nice afternoon. Verbena Marrow worked the night shift in the laundry at a hospital on Limestone for 26 years. She came home at 7 in the morning smelling like industrial bleach and hot cotton, and she slept until 2. And she was awake and dressed and cooking by the time the truck came back down the street. She was not a horsewoman. She had been on a horse exactly twice and did not care for it, but she is the reason for everything that happens later. And here's why. Verbena Marrow could not stand a thing that was not written down. She kept the household in composition books, the black and white marbled kind, 40 cents at the drugstore on Elm Tree Lane. Every dollar in, every dollar out, every job Willis did and what he charged and whether he got paid, in a hand like a schoolteacher's. When the man at the finance company told her she had missed 2 payments, she walked in with the book. When the farm that owed Willis $1,100 said they had settled up in the fall, she walked in with the book. She won every time she walked in with the book, and she lost every time she did not, and she made sure her son watched both. She had a line. He heard it 1,000 times before he was 12. If you didn't write it, you didn't say it. You will want to remember that. Sundays, they went to a white-frame church on the north side, with a gravel lot and a piano that had been half a step flat since before Zeke was born. Verbena sang alto. The fans in the pew racks had a picture of the Good Shepherd on one side, and an advertisement for a funeral home on the other. And Zeke spent a decade of Sunday mornings looking at that funeral home ad and thinking about how strange it was that they gave those out for free. His faith was not decorative, and it was not loud. He did not talk about it much. But he came out of that room with one conviction that a person can build a life on, which is that the value of a man is not set by the room he is standing in. It is fixed somewhere else, in advance, by somebody who is not taking a poll. That conviction is very useful. When you are the only black man on a lawn and 140 people are watching you be told to leave. Willis got hurt when Zeke was 25. A stallion went over backward in a stall in November, and Willis got his hip between the horse and the wall. He was back under horses in 9 weeks, which was 9 weeks too early, and he shot on that hip for another 11 years, going shorter and shorter days, until the day he did 4 horses and sat down on the tailgate and could not get back up. He died at 66 of a stroke in his own kitchen on a Tuesday morning. Verbena outlived him by 14 years. Zeke buried his father with the rasp in his hand, his mother's idea. By then Zeke had his own book. He was 36, and he had been shoeing on his own for 11 years, and he had discovered that he was not just competent, he was something else. He was the man they called when somebody else had already failed. He had no shop. He had no sign. He had no website in the years when everybody got a website, and no website in the years after that either. He had a phone number that got passed around a 5-county area, and a truck, and a reputation that was very specific and very strange. If a horse had been looked at by 3 people and was still wrong, somebody would eventually say, "Have you had marrow out?" 38 years. Roughly 11,000 working days, 8 to 10 horses on a good one, because he would not do more. That number matters. Hold on to it. 19 of those years did most work at Marriage Farm, 1,200 acres, off the old Frankfort Pike, 4 barns, 60 broodmares, a yearling program that consigned to the September sale every year. He was not an employee. He was a contractor with a handshake and an invoice book, and he was on that farm 3 days most weeks for 19 years. And he shod, at a rough count, over 400 horses that were born there. He wrote up every one of them. Long notes, longer than anybody wanted. That was the problem, as it turned out. Merritt Kettleman came to Merrick Ridge with a program. That was the word he used, program, and he used it the way a man uses a word he has practiced. He was 41, and he was very good on his feet in a conference room, and he had a sponsorship arrangement with a company that made a composite glue-on shoe. And he had a philosophy about hoof biomechanics with a diagram attached to it, and he could shoe 22 horses in a day with 2 apprentices swinging behind him. 22. Zeke did 8. You can see how that meeting went without me describing it. The program included a move from a 4-week shoeing cycle to a 6-week cycle across the yearling barn, on the grounds that fewer resets meant less wall damage. There is an argument for that. It is not a stupid argument. It is also, if you run it on a farm where 1/3 of the horses have thin, flat, fast-growing feet, because of the limestone water and the soft ground and the way they are bred. A way to have a horse standing on a shoe that has gone a week past useful. Zeke would not sign off on it. Not for all of them. He said so in a meeting twice, and then he said so in writing, which was worse. 11 weeks later, Prescott Hurst called him at 4:40 on a Thursday afternoon. The call lasted 91 seconds. Zeke knows that's because Verbena Marrow raised him, and his phone keeps a log, and he wrote the number down afterward in the book next to the date, along with the words spoken as best he could remember them. The farm was consolidating its farrier services under a single program going forward. The relationship was valued. There was no reflection on the quality of his work. Somebody would be in touch about the outstanding invoices. Nobody was in touch about the outstanding invoices. He sent 3 statements and then he let it go, because chasing $840 from a 1,200-acre farm is a way to spend 6 months being angry. Here is what he did do. He had 4 days of work left on the schedule before the change took effect, and he did all 4 days. He shod 31 head, most of them yearlings in sales prep for September. And on the last afternoon, in the aisle of Barn 3, sitting on an overturned bucket with a clipboard on his knee and the light going orange in the doorway, he wrote up every single one of them the way he always had. Long notes, longer than anybody wanted. One of those horses was a bay colt out of a mare named Overdue, a big-bodied yearling with a good shoulder and a bad set of front feet. The ticket is 4 lines long. I have seen a photograph of it. The handwriting is small and square, and it slopes very slightly uphill, the way handwriting does when a man is writing on his knee. Right fore, thin sole, measured 6 millimeters at toe. Flat, no concavity. Wall quality, fair to poor at quarters. 4-week cycle only. Do not extend. Do not nail high on this foot. Keep them low and out. If in doubt, use a glue. E. Marrow, July 9. He signed it. He dated it. He put it in the folder in the tack room where the Farrier tickets went, and the folder went into the sales prep file, and the sales prep file went to Tarleton Bloodstock, the consignor, because the sales company requires a records packet on every yearling in the catalog, and the packet is put in the repository, and the repository is where a buyer goes to look before he spends $4 million. Then he loaded his truck and drove out through the back gate for the last time. 21 months later, the buyer of that colt would stand on a lawn and bet him $250,000 that he did not know what he was talking about. He had been holding the answer in a file cabinet the whole time. He had paid $4 million for it. It was on page 40 of a 90-page packet, and he had never turned to it, and neither had anybody who worked for him. Nobody reads page 40. That is not a moral failing. That is just how people are with paper. But I want you to hold that thought, because in about 6 months, a lawyer is going to hold up page 40 in a conference room in downtown Lexington. And a man's entire life is going to come apart in the 4 seconds it takes to read 4 lines of small square handwriting that slopes uphill, back to the lawn. 41 minutes, and a man in a leather apron climbing over a white board fence in front of 300 people, which at 61 years old with 2 bad knees is not a dignified maneuver, and he did not attempt to make it one. The first thing he needed was a pair of hoof testers, which is a tool that looks like a giant set of curved pliers and costs about $70. And there was a pair of them in the tack room of the show barn 90 feet away, and Merritt Kettleman was standing between him and it. "I'm not handing him anything," Kettleman said. "You're not being asked," said a girl's voice. Her name was Marlo Fentress. She was 22 years old, from Cynthiana, Kentucky. And she made $16.40 an hour walking hots and doing night check in the training barn at Merrick Ridge. She had a spiral notebook in her back pocket, the top-bound kind, curled from washing. She was 5'1". She had been standing at the corner of the barn, with her arms folded, since the moment the shouting started. She was already moving before she finished the sentence. She came back at a dead run with the hoof testers in one hand, and a hoof-a-pick and a wire brush in the other. And she put them in Zeke's hands, and she said, quietly, so that only he heard it, 3rd and 4th, inside. I think it's the 4th. Marlo Fentress was the one who called him that morning. She had met him 2 years earlier at a lay-up farm outside Paris, Kentucky, where she was mucking 12 stalls for a woman who paid cash. A gelding there had been lame for 5 months and had seen 3 veterinarians. Zeke came out on a Saturday, pulled both front shoes, and found a keratoma the size of a thumbnail. Marlo, 19 and invisible, had asked him one question about why he had picked that foot first. And instead of grunting at her, a 60-year-old man had squatted in a barn aisle and answered her for 20 minutes and drawn a diagram on the back of a feed bag. She had kept his number for 2 years and never used it. She used it at 6:40 that morning, standing in the dark outside barn 2, whispering, after her 4th night in a row watching a $4 million Colt refuse to square up on his right front. I want to be clear about what that phone call cost her, because it is easy to make her cute, and she was not cute. She was terrified. She had 2 entries in the bound barn log with her initials on them. Both had been struck through. She had been told, once by Kettleman and once by an assistant trainer, to stop putting things in the log that she was not qualified to put in the log. She was making $16.40 an hour with no degree, no license, no family in the business, and a car with 190,000 miles on it. She made the call anyway. Courage is not distributed fairly, and never has been. It costs the least from the people who have the most. It costs the most from a 22-year-old girl with a spiral notebook who can be replaced by a text message. Zeke went to the Colt. The first thing he did was nothing, for about 20 seconds, standing at the shoulder with a hand flat on the neck, letting the animal get used to a new smell. Horses read hands. Everybody in that crowd was watching a man stand still and thought nothing was happening, and something was happening. Then he ran his hand down the right front leg, and at the back of the fetlock he stopped, and he put 2 fingers on a spot the size of a pencil eraser, and he closed his eyes. Somebody in the crowd said, "What is he doing?" He was counting. The digital arteries run down either side of the back of the fetlock. In a sound foot, you can barely find them. When something inside the hoof capsule is inflamed and swelling, and the hoof is a rigid box that will not let it swell, the blood backs up and that little artery starts to thump like a drum you can feel through the skin. Farriers call it a bounding pulse. It is the single most useful piece of information in the front half of a horse, and it costs nothing, and it takes 4 seconds, and any person on that farm could have been taught to find it in an afternoon. He moved to the left front and did it again. Then he stood up. Left front, nothing, he said. Right front, bounding. Foot's warm, too. Put your hand on both of them, he said to Dr. Ruark. Don't take my word for it. Constance Ruark was the farm's contract veterinarian, 44 years old, in jeans and a quarter zip, with a stethoscope hanging out of her hip pocket. She had been standing at the edge of all this with her arms crossed, and an expression I would describe as a woman doing arithmetic she did not like the look of. She knelt. She put her hand on the right front hoof wall, then the left. She stood up. The right one's warm, she said. Kettleman said every foot on this farm is warm. It's 78 degrees. Then the left one would be warm too, Ruark said. She did not say it unkindly. She said it the way you say a thing you have just realized about yourself. Zeke asked for the Colt to be walked. 20 steps up the paved apron, 20 steps back on the grass strip beside it. The groom looked at Hurst. Hurst looked at Ridgway. Ridgway made a small motion with 2 fingers, the way a man does when he has stopped being entertained and started being interested. On the concrete, the Colt was a 4 out of 5 lame, head dropping like a hammer every time the left front hit and the right front came around. On the grass, he was a 2. I want everybody watching this, Zeke said, and he did not raise his voice, but it carried, because a lawn full of people had gone quiet enough that it did not have to be raised. Watch him on the hard, watch him on the soft, twice as bad on the hard. That's a foot. A shoulder doesn't care what he's standing on. A foot cares about everything. He was not showing off. That is a thing he had been taught to say out loud by a woman who worked in a hospital laundry. Because you say it out loud in front of people so that later on nobody can decide you did not say it. He picked up the foot. 32 minutes. The hoof testers went around the foot in a circle, and he squeezed at every position. And he called them out as he went, the way a man does when he is building a record and not a performance. Heel, nothing. Bar, nothing. Toe, nothing. Outside quarter, nothing. Then he came around to the inside quarter, up near the top, and he squeezed. And the Colt snatched that foot up out of his hand so hard that Zeke went a step sideways to stay on his feet. 300 people made one sound. There, he said. He put the foot down and let the horse settle and picked it up again and did it once more. A little forward, then once more, at the spot, and got the same reaction the same way in the same place. Kettleman said, that's a reaction to pressure. Any horse will do that. Zeke said, do it on the left front. Do what? Take these, said Zeke, and he held the testers out, handle first, arms straight. Take them and do the same 6 positions on his good foot, and let's see if he snatches it. Kettleman did not take the testers. I want to give that moment the space it deserves. A man was offered a tool and a chance to prove himself right in front of the only people whose opinion he cared about. And it would have taken 40 seconds, and he did not take it. Not because he was afraid of the tool, because he had already worked out what was under that shoe, and he was doing math on the rest of his life. Everything after this is just the paperwork catching up with a decision Merritt Kettleman made while standing on a lawn with his hands at his sides. Zeke put the foot in his lap and started pulling nails. If you have never watched it done, a shoe does not come off in one heroic yank. You open the clinches with a chisel, you loosen the shoe a little at a time from heel to toe, and then a competent man takes it off nail by nail with a pair of crease nail pullers, one at a time. and looks at each nail as it comes out. That last part is not standard. Most people pull the shoe and pitch it in the bucket. Willis Marrow made his son look at every nail, every time, for 38 years, on the theory that the nail has been somewhere you have not. He laid them on the concrete as they came out, in order like a man laying out silverware. Outside heel, clean outside quarter, clean inside toe, clean inside quarter low, clean. The sixth one came out wet. He held it up. You could not have seen it from the crowd. You could barely see it from 6 feet. But there was a bead of straw-colored fluid sitting on the shank about 2/3 of the way up, and above that a gray-black stain that ran to the point. And the point itself had a little curl of something on it that was not hoof wall. Dr. Ruark walked over and took it out of his hand and held it at arm's length and then close. "That's serum," she said. "That nail's in the white line at best," Zeke said. "My guess is it's past it. He's been walking on that for a week and a half, and every step he took pumped that hole full of dirt. He did not put that nail on the concrete with the others. He put it in his shirt pocket, and he buttoned the flap. If you want to know the exact moment Merritt Kettleman's career ended, it was not the diagnosis, and it was not the drainage. It was a 61-year-old man in a leather apron, buttoning a flap on a shirt pocket in front of a hired videographer. Because he had been raised by a woman who understood that the object is the argument, and everything else is just talking. 24 minutes. He took his hoof knife and he pared. He did it slowly, in thin shavings, and he stopped every few passes and thumbed the surface. And the crowd began to press in against the fence, and nobody told them not to. 2 minutes in, the knife opened a black tract about the width of pencil lead. He followed it. 4 passes later, a bead of fluid came up out of the hole. Straw-colored, thick. Then a second one behind it, darker gray-brown, and with it a smell that anybody who has ever worked in a barn knows immediately and never enjoys. The Colt let out a breath and dropped his head about 8 inches, and his whole body changed. That is a real thing, and it is not sentimental. When you open a subsolar abscess, the pressure inside a rigid box goes to 0, and the pain goes with it, and the animal will tell you inside of 10 seconds. He put weight on the leg with Zeke still holding the opposite side of the foot. Dr. Roark got down on the concrete in her jeans with her face 8 inches from a horse's foot, and she looked for a long time. Then she stood up and she said the sentence out loud. And I want you to notice how much it cost her to say it in front of her largest client. "There's no shoulder problem," she said. "There never was one. I injected a shoulder because I was told the foot had been cleared." Ridgway said, "Told by who?" Ruark did not answer. She did not have to. 300 people turned their heads at the same time, and Merritt Kettleman was already walking toward the parking field with his phone at his ear. Nobody stopped him. I have thought about that. Nobody stopped him, and I think that is right. Because the thing that was going to happen to that man could not be done on a lawn by an angry crowd. It had to be done slowly by a claims adjuster and an auditor, and a hearing officer out of a banker's box. Zeke finished the foot. He flushed the tract with dilute iodine, packed it with iodine-soaked gauze, and asked for a bucket. Marlowe brought a rubber feed tub, warm water from the wash rack, and a 2-pound bag of Epsom salt out of the medicine cabinet. 20 minutes with the foot in the tub, then a diaper, a wrap, duct tape. And the shoe tacked back on with 5 nails, all of them low and all of them out, because the foot still had to be protected and the wall would not hold anything higher. It was 6 minutes past 4 when he stood up. The van had been sitting at the top of the drive with its ramp down for 18 of those minutes. Nobody had told the driver anything. Nobody had told the driver anything all day. Which, if you think about it, is the whole farm in one sentence. Ridgway came over. The crowd did not follow him. Even people like that know when to stay back. "He'll run in the Cardinal," Ridgway said. "It's 9 days. "No, sir," Zeke said. "I have 300,000 in nominations and entry." "No, sir," Zeke said. "He'll be walking sound tonight. He'll be trotting sound in 3 days, maybe 4. The hole in the bottom of that foot is going to take 5 months to grow out to the ground, and until it does, he's got a place in his soul that a stone will find. He'll be ready in the fall. He will not be ready in 9 days, and you should not want him to be." He wiped his hands on a rag and put the rag in his apron. "You asked me what's wrong with your horse," he said. "That's what's wrong with your horse. I'm not going to stand here and tell you a lie to win a bet. There it is. That is the man. Right there. He had $250,000 sitting on a sentence, and the sentence that would have won it was available, and would have sounded better. And he told the truth instead, and the truth cost him nothing, because he was never selling anything. Harlan Ridgway looked at him for what people who were there say was 5 or 6 full seconds. Then he said, "What's your name?" "Ezekiel Marrow." Ridgway did not say anything else. He turned around and walked up the hill to the tent, and everybody got out of his way. Everything up to this point is the part people tell at parties. It is the wrong part. It has a lawn and a crowd and a rich man's face changing, and it is very satisfying, and it did not fix one single thing. What fixed things took 9 months and happened almost entirely in rooms with bad carpet. The wire hit Zeke's account at 9:14 the next morning. $250,000 even. No memo line. From a holding company in Delaware. He was under a 15-year-old minivan in his own gravel driveway at the time, because his cousin's transmission was slipping and he had told her he would look at it. He called the number on the card and asked how to send it back. Ridgway said, "You won. I told you he wouldn't run. That was the answer you were paying for. And it isn't the answer you wanted. The bet was whether you could tell me what was wrong with my horse. You told me what was wrong with my horse. In 20 minutes in front of everybody I know with a pair of pliers." Then a silence on the line, and then a sentence that I think is the truest thing Harlan Ridgway ever said out loud. "I've had money for 11 years, he said. Yesterday was the first time I've been embarrassed by it. Here is where people want me to turn Harlan Ridgway into the hero of the second half. I am not going to do it. He was cruel. He looked at a working man with dirt in his hands and made a spectacle out of him for 60 investors because his afternoon was dragging. That he paid the bet does not undo it. That he chased the truth afterward does not undo it. There is a version of this where Zeke Marrow is a little slower or a little less certain, and in that version Harlan Ridgway gets a laugh. The van goes to Ocala, and a man in a leather apron drives home on the old Frankfurt Pike, with 300 people's laughter in his ears. And there is no story and nobody makes a fund, and nobody's life gets better. He got lucky that the man he humiliated happened to be the best in the state. That is not a moral virtue. That is a coin landing. What he did afterward, though, he does get credit for, because most men in his position do nothing afterward. Most men in his position take the lesson, feel bad for a week, and go back to Cincinnati. Ridgway went to the file. He had a records packet on his own Colt. Every buyer does. 91 pages from Tarleton Bloodstock, delivered before the sale, sitting in a cloud folder that his Bloodstock advisor had opened once. He sat in an office on the 18th floor of a building he owned, on a Thursday morning, and he scrolled through it page by page. Page 40 is a scan of a Farrier ticket, small square handwriting sloping uphill. Right 4, thin sole, measured 6 millimeters at toe. 4-week cycle only. Do not extend. Do not nail high on this foot. E. Marrow, July 9. He had paid $4 million for that Colt, and the answer had come with him free, in the box, 21 months before anybody got lame. He told me later that he read it 4 times, and then he sat there for about 10 minutes and did not do anything at all. Then he called a lawyer, and then he called an auditor. And then, because he is the kind of man he is, he called his insurance broker and killed the loss of use claim before it was filed, which was the only genuinely selfless thing he did in the whole business, because a filed claim would have paid him, and an unfiled one did not. And then the paper started coming out. The barn log came first. Merrick Ridge kept bound logs in every barn numbered pages, no tear-outs, because their equine mortality carrier required it, and because the sales company liked to see it. 2 entries in a small round hand. March 30, 2:40 a.m. R front. Won't square up, standing pointed at the wall, been like it 4 nights. MF April 2:3:15 a.m. R front. Pulse in the leg is real strong compared to the other one. Foot feels hot to me. Please have somebody look. MF, both struck through with a single line in blue ballpoint over black and initialed in the margin. MK. You cannot unwrite a bound log. That is the entire point of a bound log. A man had drawn a line through the only correct diagnosis on the property, twice in his own handwriting, and then initialed it, and then put the book back on the shelf where the insurance company required it to stay for 6 years. Second came the email. Dr. Ruark's practice management software retained everything for 5 years, which is not generosity, it is the veterinary board's rule. Sent on the 6th of April at 8:51 in the morning. From Merritt Kettleman to Constance Ruark. Subject line simply the Colt's name. Feet are clean, nothing Farrier related, don't waste your time down there. I'd look higher, shoulder or neck. She had believed him. That is the part that kept her up. She was a licensed veterinarian with 16 years in the field and a hoof tester in her own truck. And she had taken a farrier's word for a foot she never picked up, because he was confident and she was booked, and there were 40 other horses that day. And then she had injected a joint that had nothing wrong with it. She reported herself to the state board. Nobody made her. Nobody would ever have known. She wrote it up in 3 pages, sent it in, and got a letter of concern in her file, and she kept her license. And she now carries hoof testers in the front of the truck instead of the back, and she picks up the foot herself every single time. I have gone back and forth on Constance Ruark, and I have landed here. She is the only person in this whole story who did a hard thing without a crowd making her do it. Third came the money, and the money is what finished him. Merritt Kettleman was a modern operator, and modern operators invoice on an app. Itemized, photographed, time-stamped, emailed, with his logo at the top and a link to his sponsor at the bottom. He was proud of it. He used to show it to farm managers as proof of how organized he was, compared to the old guys with the carbon books. He had billed Merrick Ridge Farm and 2 other farms and Harlan Ridgeway directly for a line item he called the Therapeutic Urethane Composite Package. Glue on shoes with impression material, hand-fitted, $3,800 per horse per cycle. He billed it 309 times over 26 months. He did it about 40. What went on the rest of those horses was a standard steel keg shoe, machine made, $28 a pair at the supply house, nailed on in 11 minutes. And the way they caught him was so simple it is almost funny. Merrick Ridge photographs every yearling in the sales program on the 1st of every month. Standing confirmation shots, both sides, front and rear, on a hard surface with the feet square, high resolution, because that is what buyers ask for, and because the farm's whole marketing operation runs on those pictures. There are 11,000 of them on a server. A glue-on composite shoe has a cuff that comes up the outside of the hoof wall, and there is no nail head anywhere on it. A steel shoe has 7 nail heads in a row. A first-year vet student can tell them apart from across a parking lot. The farm's own marketing archive convicted him. The pictures he loved, that he had helped stage, that made the horses look so good going into the ring, were 11,000 time-stamped photographs of the feet he was lying about. The auditor found it in 4 days. Now hold 2 things next to each other. Hard Bargain went through 9 shoeing cycles under Merritt Kettleman's program. Kettleman billed $34,200 for gluing shoes onto that Colt on the specific written recommendation of the previous farrier that if in doubt you should glue this foot. He nailed them on, all 9 times. High because he was moving fast and the wall was poor, and a high nail holds better in a bad wall for the first 3 weeks, and it is somebody else's problem after that. He charged a man $34,200 to do the exact thing a file in his own tack room told him not to do. Read that again. That is not carelessness. Carelessness is free. That is a man taking money to not do the thing he was taking the money for, on a horse whose file said what would happen if he didn't, and then drawing a blue line through a night groom's handwriting when it started happening. It came apart in 3 directions at once. The civil side was almost boring. Merrick Ridge, Ridgeway's racing entity, and 2 farms out toward Midway filed together. The number in the complaint was $214,730 in billed but not performed work, plus the veterinary costs of the injection and the 11 days, plus the entry fees. It settled in February for an amount that is under seal. And everybody involved has told me the same thing about it, which is that the settlement was not the point, and nobody felt anything when it happened. The regulatory side was faster, and it hurt more. Kettleman held an occupational license with the State Racing Commission, which every farrier who works on the backside has to hold. And there was a hearing in a low brick building in Frankfort, with a hearing officer and a court reporter and 11 people in the gallery. He came in a good suit. He had a lawyer. He explained the composite package as an evolving service description. They pulled his license. He can still shoe horses on a farm. He cannot set foot on a licensed racetrack in that state again, which for a man whose entire business was built on being the guy the racing outfits used is the same as being finished. And then the criminal side, which took until the following autumn. Theft by deception, over $10,000. In Kentucky, that is a Class C felony. He pled to it, because 309 invoices against 11,000 photographs is not a case you take to a jury. He got probation and a restitution schedule that will run for 11 years. He is 43 years old and he is a convicted felon, and every farm manager in the bluegrass knows his name. Nobody planted anything. Nobody framed him. Nobody had to lie about him even a little. He built every piece of the machine that ate him. He bought the invoicing app because it made him look organized. He staged the photographs because they made his work look good. He initialed the log because he wanted a record that he had reviewed it. He sent the email to the vet because he wanted it on file that he had cleared the feet. A careless man leaves gaps. An arrogant man leaves a paper trail because an arrogant man believes the record is going to protect him. And Prescott Hurst. The board of Merrick Ridge Farm did not fire Prescott Hurst for calling security on a 61-year-old man in a leather apron. Nobody at that level ever gets fired for that, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. They fired him because the audit ran his approvals. In 26 months, Prescott Hurst had approved 640 Farrier invoices, totaling just under $900,000. And in that same 26 months, according to the gate logs and his own vehicle records, he had physically walked into Barn 3 11 times. Not cruelty, not fraud, just a man who signed things about a place he never went to. That is the most common kind of harm there is, and it almost never has a name. Marlo Fentress was let go 8 days after the lawn. The stated reason was attendance. She had been 11 minutes late twice in March and had left 40 minutes early on a Sunday in February when her car would not start in Cynthiana. It was all documented. It was documented beautifully. Somebody in that office spent real time building that file. She sent Zeke one text message about it. It said, "Well, that's that," with no punctuation after it. And then a picture of her car packed with a duffel bag and a pair of muck boots and a hay net she had apparently decided was hers. Ridgway offered her a job the following week. Assistant to his racing manager, salary, benefits, an office in Cincinnati with a window. She turned it down. I want you to understand how much nerve that took. 22 years old, unemployed, 190,000 miles on a Corolla, $400 in the bank, and a billionaire on the phone offering her the first salary of her life. She said, "Thank you, but I don't want to sit down." Then she called Zeke and asked him if he was ever going to take on anybody, because she had been thinking about it for 2 years and had never had the nerve to ask. The money sat in the account for 5 months, and he did not touch a dollar of it. He kept working. He kept doing 8 horses a day out of the same truck. He told people who asked that he had not figured out what it was for yet, which was true, and that he was not going to spend it on something stupid just because it was burning a hole, which was also true, and which is a sentence a woman who kept a household in 40-cent composition books would have recognized as her own. What he finally did with it is the reason I am telling you any of this. There is a shop on Winchester Road, on the east side of Lexington, cinder block, 4 bays, a metal roof that sounds like the end of the world when it rains. It used to be a muffler place. There is a forge in the back now, and 6 anvils, and a long steel bench, and a wall of tools that were bought new. It is called the Willis Marrow Shoeing Program, and it is a 2-year paid apprenticeship, and it takes 6 people a year. Here is the problem it exists to solve, and it is a real problem, and almost nobody outside the trade knows about it. There is a shortage of farriers in this country, and it is getting worse every year. The average working farrier is in his 50s. The reason young people do not come in is not that the work is hard, although it is, and it is not that the money is bad, because a good one does well. The reason is that it takes 2 to 4 years of working under somebody before you can support yourself. And during those years you make almost nothing. And you have to buy about $8,000 of tools before you start. Which means the trade selects, quietly and without anybody deciding it, for people who have somebody behind them. A father with a truck. A family with a farm. 2 years of somewhere to sleep for free. If you do not have that, the door is closed, and no one ever tells you it is closed. You just find that you cannot get through it. So the program pays. $19 an hour from the first day. Tools provided, and the tools are yours when you finish. And if you quit in the first 6 months, you still keep the rasp. 2 years, 90% of it out on real farms under real horses. Because you cannot learn this in a classroom, and Zeke will tell you that inside of 4 minutes if you ask him. Ridgway matched the $250,000 and then matched it again the second year. 2 farms out toward Midway put in. Tarleton Bloodstock funds a slot. Constance Ruark teaches the anatomy block, 2 evenings a month, for nothing. On the first morning, every apprentice gets handed one thing before they touch a horse. A composition book, the black and white marbled kind. He does not make a speech about it. He hands it over and says 9 words. If you didn't write it, you didn't say it. Some of them figure out what it means in the first month. Some of them figure it out in the second year, standing in a barn aisle with a farm manager, telling them they never mentioned anything about that foot. There is also a jar on the bench by the door, small glass, the kind jelly comes in. Inside it is a single horseshoe nail bent, with a gray-black stain on the shank 2/3 of the way up. Every new apprentice gets handed the jar on day 1. He does not explain it. He waits to see how long it takes them to ask. Marlo Fentress was the first one through. She finished her 2 years, and she is licensed, and she has her own truck now, and about 30 clients, mostly small barns and lesson horses, and a couple of the lay-up farms, which is where the money is not, and the horses that need help are. She writes everything down. She writes down so much that people complain about it. Then there is the rule, which is the piece of this that has outlived everybody involved. Harlan Ridgway wrote a clause into every training contract, boarding agreement, and lay-up arrangement he signs, and he has a lot of horses, and he signs a lot of them. The people who have to comply with it call it the pull rule. The actual language is this: before any joint injection, any advanced imaging, or any recommendation of lay-up on any horse in this ownership, the shoes shall be removed from the affected limb, and the foot examined with hoof testers by a licensed farrier, who is not the farrier of record for that horse. And the written report of that examination shall be transmitted to the owner unaltered. That is all it is. It cost about $80 and 40 minutes. 2 other ownership groups copied it inside of a year and a half. One of the bigger consignors put a version of it into their sales prep protocol. A veterinary association in the region put a paper out about the diagnostic value of ruling out the foot first, which is not a new idea. It is a 100-year-old idea, and which every good horseman has always known, and which had somehow stopped being done on a 1,200-acre farm with a $900,000 farrier budget. Ridgway offered twice to build Zeke a real shop with his name over the door. Modern. Air conditioning in the front. 2 employees. He said no both times. The second time he explained it, which for him is unusual. I'm 61, he said. I've got maybe 9 good years of bending over left in me, and that's if my knees are generous. I'd rather spend them teaching somebody else how to bend over after I can't. And the Colt. Hard Bargain did not run in the Cardinal Stakes. He did not run in anything that spring, or that summer. The hole in the bottom of his foot grew down and out, and he wore a shoe with a leather pad over a packing for 4 months. And there was a stretch in July where it looked like the whole heel might separate. He came back in October at Keeneland and ran 4th, beaten 5 lengths, and honestly, he ran like a horse who had spent 5 months in a wrap. In November, he won a grade 3 going 1 mile and a 16th at odds of 8-1, and it was not the Derby and it was not on television. And there were maybe 9,000 people there. He ran through his 4-year-old year, won 2 more, and was retired sound. He stands at a farm in Louisiana for a stud fee of $5,000. His first crop is on the ground. They are perfectly nice horses. I am telling you that because the ending you want is that the Colt goes on and wins something enormous and the whole world sees it, and the man in the leather apron is standing in the winner's circle in a borrowed jacket. That is not what happened. What happened is that a horse who would have been drilled with needles and shipped to Florida and probably ruined instead had a hole opened in his foot and got better and had a decent little career, and now lives in a field in Louisiana, breeding perfectly nice horses. That is the actual size of most victories. If you can only be moved by the enormous kind, you are going to miss almost everything that matters. Now let me correct the record on one thing. because it has gotten away from everybody, and Verbena Marrow's son would want it corrected. People call this the $3 nail story. I have heard it called that on the radio. I have heard it at a sale in Kentucky from a man who was telling it to somebody who had never heard it. And he told it well, and he got that part wrong. It was not $3. A city head slim blade horseshoe nail, the kind you use in a thin wall, runs about 11 cents. He drove 5 of them, that is 55 cents. The dilute iodine he flushed the tract with, call it 30 cents worth out of a gallon jug. The gauze, a dime. The Epsom salt out of the farm's own medicine cabinet, maybe 70 cents. Round it up and be generous, and you can get to $3 if you count the salt and the water and a piece of duct tape. Now put that next to the other numbers. $4 million, the purchase price. $4,250,000, the insured value. $34,200, bill to glue shoes onto a horse that was nailed. 11 days of nothing, 4 veterinarians. 1 joint injection into a healthy shoulder. A bone scan in Florida quoted at $5,100, plus a $2,000 van ride each way. $300,000 in nominations and entries about to be thrown in a ditch. Against $3 and about 40 minutes of a man's time. That is the real arithmetic, and it is worse than the version people tell, not better. Because here is what I want you to sit with, and I want to be honest that it is less comfortable than the ending made it feel. The bet did not produce the truth. The truth had been sitting in a filing cabinet for 21 months. It was on page 40 of a records packet that the owner of the horse had paid $4 million for and had in his own cloud storage the entire time. It was in a bound barn log in a 22-year-old girl's round handwriting, twice, with a blue line drawn through it. It was in a warm hoof and a bounding artery that any person on that farm could have found in 4 seconds, if anybody had taught them to look. There were, by my count, at least 6 separate moments over 11 days where a single person walking 8 feet and picking up 1 foot would have ended the whole thing. Nobody did, and what finally made it happen was not the wager, and it was not Harlan Ridgway's curiosity, and it was not even Zeke Marrow's 40 years of knowing. It was 300 people and a hired videographer. It was the fact that on that particular afternoon there were too many witnesses to do the thing that had already been done twice in that barn, which was to tell somebody to be quiet and go back to work. That should bother you. It bothers me. It means the system did not correct itself. It got embarrassed in public and then corrected itself, and those are not the same thing. And only one of them is available to most people on most days. Marlo Fentress told the truth in a bound log at 2:40 in the morning with nobody watching. And it got a line drawn through it. Ezekiel Marrow told the truth on a clipboard on his knee in barn 3 with nobody watching, and it got filed on page 40. Both of them were right. Both of them were ignored. The only difference the third time was that somebody was holding a camera. So here is the part of this I would ask you not to look away from. Every one of us has been on both sides of that lawn. We have all been the person who knew, who said it once, quietly, in the right way to the right person, and watched a line get drawn through it. Who decided after the second time that it was not our job, that we were not qualified, that somebody above us surely had it handled. That is a reasonable thing to decide. It is also how a horse stands on an abscess for 11 days. And we have all been the person who drew the line, not out of malice, out of being busy, out of 140 people waiting on us, and 6 sentences left in a talk we had given 4 times. Out of having already decided, in the half-second it takes to see a leather apron and a cracked boot, exactly which category a man belongs in, and therefore exactly how much of our attention he has earned. That half-second is the whole thing. That is where it all lives. Merritt Kettleman did not destroy himself with fraud. He destroyed himself with a half-second on a lawn, and then he spent 9 months and 309 invoices defending it. Zeke Marrow's father was right about the paper. They never had to take the horses. They took the license and the contract and the record. And after enough years, everyone agreed, honestly and without any malice, that folks like that had never been in this business. And so his son spent 38 years writing things down that nobody wanted to read. Long notes, longer than anybody wanted. A record with a name on it and a date on it, filed where it had to be kept, on the theory that the truth does not have to win today. It only has to still be there when somebody finally goes looking. Verbena Marrow is buried in a cemetery on the north side of Lexington, up the hill from a white-frame church with a piano that is still half a step flat. Her son goes out there a few times a year. He does not stay long. He has never once in his life told anybody what he says when he is there. I will tell you what I think he says, and then I will let you go. I think he tells her the book worked, because that is what she gave him. Not a trade, and not a truck. And not even really a faith, though he has one, and it is the plain kind that does not need an audience. What she gave him was the conviction that a man's worth is set somewhere else, in advance, by somebody who is not taking a poll. And that in the meantime, down here, where people will look at your hands and decide what you are, your job is simply to write it down. Write it down, sign it, date it, put it in the file. And then, when 300 people in good hats are all looking at somebody else, go pick up the foot. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean that. Have you ever been the one who knew? Have you ever said the true thing in the room, in the right way, to the right person, and watched somebody draw a line through it and go back to what they were doing? What did you do the second time? Did you write it down, or did you decide it was not your job? Or, and be honest, because this one is harder, have you ever been the one holding the blue pen? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and the ones on these stories are the reason I keep making them. If this got to you, take 1 second and hit the like button, because it genuinely does decide whether anybody else ever sees it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, told the whole way through with the uncomfortable parts left in. And if there is somebody in your life who has spent their whole working life being talked over, being seen for 400,000 feet, and never once for what they knew, send this to them tonight. They will understand it faster than anybody. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I will see you in the next one.